June 10, 1942, Beat Hakeim, Libya. Midnight. Susan Travers grips the steering wheel of a battered Ford truck. Her hands are shaking. Not from fear, from the engine vibration as she revs it to maximum. Behind her truck, a convoy of 2,500 French Foreign Legion soldiers, men who've been surrounded by Rommel's Afrika Korps for 16 days, cut off. No supplies, no escape, waiting to die in the desert. In front of her, 3 kilometers of enemy-held territory, German and Italian soldiers, machine gun nests, artillery positions, and, buried somewhere in the sand, thousands of landmines. Susan is 32 years old, British, the daughter of a wealthy naval officer. She's never been trained for combat. She's an ambulance driver, a woman in an army that doesn't officially allow women. And tonight, she's volunteering to drive the lead vehicle through a minefield in complete darkness. No headlights, no maps, just instinct and impossible courage. If I die, she thinks, at least I die doing something that matters. She releases the clutch, the truck lurches forward into the darkness. Behind her, 2,500 men follow. They're betting their lives that this British woman can navigate a path through hell. She doesn't disappoint. This is the story of Susan Travers, the only woman ever admitted to the French Foreign Legion, the ambulance driver who became a legend, and the suicidal midnight drive that saved 2,500 soldiers from certain death.
Susan Travers was born into privilege, 1909, London. Her father was a Royal Navy admiral. Her family had money, status, connections. She grew up in mansions, attended finishing schools, was expected to marry well and live a comfortable, conventional life. Susan had other plans. Even as a teenager, she was restless. She didn't want tea parties and social gatherings. She wanted adventure. She learned to drive, unusual for a woman in the 1920s. She traveled. She pushed boundaries. When World War II started in 1939, Susan was living in France. She was 30 years old, unmarried, independent. And when France mobilized for war, Susan didn't evacuate to safety in England like other British expatriates. She volunteered. The French Red Cross accepted her as an ambulance driver. It was one of the few military roles open to women. She drove wounded soldiers from the front lines to field hospitals. It was dangerous, exhausting work. Susan loved it. When France fell to Germany in June 1940, Susan had a choice: go home to England or join the Free French Forces, the resistance movement led by General Charles de Gaulle, operating from North Africa and trying to continue the fight against Germany. Susan chose resistance. She made her way to North Africa and joined the 13th Demi Brigade of the French Foreign Legion, an elite unit of the Free French Forces. The Legion was legendary. Soldiers from dozens of countries, unified by shared purpose, famous for their toughness and discipline. And they didn't take women. Ever. But Susan didn't want to be a legionnaire. She wanted to drive. And the Legion needed drivers. So they made an exception. She could serve with them as a civilian ambulance driver, but she wasn't officially part of the Legion. Susan didn't care about titles. She cared about the work. By 1942, she'd become the personal driver for General Marie-Pierre Koenig, commander of the 1st Free French Brigade. Koenig was brilliant, charismatic, and led from the front. He trusted Susan completely. She drove him everywhere, to meetings, to the front lines, through combat zones. They developed a relationship, professional respect that became personal affection. Some say they fell in love, though Susan never confirmed it publicly. In May 1942, Koenig's brigade was ordered to defend Bir Hakeim, a remote position in the Libyan desert about 80 kilometers south of Tobruk. It wasn't a strategic fortress or a well-fortified position. It was basically a collection of trenches and defensive positions in the middle of nowhere. But it was important. Bir Hakeim sat on the south flank of the British defensive line. If the Germans could take Bir Hakeim, they could outflank the entire British position and drive toward Egypt. Koenig's mission? Hold Bir Hakeim as long as possible. Delay the German advance. Buy time for British forces to reorganize. On May 26, Rommel's Afrika Korps attacked. The Battle of Bir Hakeim started with overwhelming force. Rommel sent Italian infantry divisions, thousands of soldiers, supported by tanks and artillery. He expected to crush the French position in a few hours. The French had 3,700 men. The Italians attacked with 5,000, plus German tank support, plus Luftwaffe airstrikes. For 2 weeks, the French held. Rommel couldn't believe it. These weren't even regular French army troops, they were Foreign Legion, colonial forces, and volunteers. By all logic, they should have been overrun immediately. But Koenig's men fought with desperate courage. They repelled attack after attack. Italian infantry would advance across open desert, and French machine guns would cut them down. German tanks would probe the defenses, and French anti-tank guns would knock them out. Susan was in the middle of it. She drove her ambulance through artillery barrages, collecting wounded men from forward positions and evacuating them to the medical station. Shells exploded around her. Bullets hit her vehicle. She kept driving. One day, a Stuka dive bomber attacked her ambulance. Susan swerved, accelerated, drove in unpredictable patterns. The bomb missed. She delivered her wounded passengers and went back for more. The soldiers started calling her La Miss, the Miss. It was said with respect, even awe. This British society woman was tougher than most of the Legion veterans. But the situation was deteriorating. The French were running out of water, running out of ammunition, running out of medical supplies. Wounded men were dying not from their injuries, but from infection and dehydration. Rommel realized the Italians couldn't break through, so he committed German forces, panzer divisions, elite infantry, concentrated artillery. The attacks intensified. By June 8th, the French position was untenable. They held for 2 weeks, far longer than anyone expected. They tied down German forces that Rommel desperately needed elsewhere. They'd accomplished their mission. But now, they were surrounded, completely cut off. No resupply possible, no reinforcements coming. The British command sent a message: "You've done enough. Hold one more night, then attempt a breakout." General Koenig gathered his officers. "We break out tomorrow night, moving west toward British lines. It's 30 kilometers through enemy territory." Someone asked the obvious question: how do we get past the German encirclement? Koenig looked at a map. "We drive through it." The plan was simple to the point of insanity. Load everyone into vehicles and drive straight through German lines at night. Fast, no lights. Hope that surprise and speed would get them through before the Germans could react. There was one massive problem. The Germans had mined the approaches to Bir Hakeim, thousands of anti-tank mines. If the convoy hit a minefield, they'd be sitting ducks for German artillery. They needed someone to drive the lead vehicle, the most dangerous position, the person who would hit any mines first, who would draw the heaviest fire, who had the least chance of survival. Koenig looked at Susan. "La Miss, will you drive my command car? Lead the convoy?" Susan didn't hesitate. "Yes, sir."
June 10, 1942, 10 p.m. The French prepared to abandon Bir Hakeim. They had about 200 vehicles, trucks, ambulances, jeeps, armored cars. They loaded the wounded first, then supplies. Then soldiers climbed into any available space. Some sat on hoods, some hung off the sides, anything to get aboard. Susan prepared her vehicle, Koenig's command car, a beaten-up Ford truck modified with armor plating. She checked the engine, the fuel, the tires. Everything had to work perfectly because there would be no stopping for repairs. Koenig briefed the convoy. "No lights. Maintain close spacing. Follow the vehicle in front of you. If someone gets stuck or hit, don't stop. Keep moving. Our only chance is speed." At 11:30 p.m., they destroyed anything they couldn't take. Burned documents, disabled remaining vehicles, spiked artillery pieces. If they were leaving Bir Hakeim, they'd leave nothing useful for the Germans. Midnight. Susan started her engine. Behind her, 200 more engines roared to life. The sound echoed across the desert, a mechanical thunder that the Germans definitely heard. German artillery opened fire immediately. Shells started falling on Bir Hakeim. The Germans thought the French were reinforcing or resupplying. They didn't realize the French were leaving. Susan drove out of the defensive perimeter, into no man's land. The truck's headlights were off, complete darkness except for starlight. The desert floor was rough, uneven, she could barely see. Behind her, the entire convoy followed, 2,500 men betting their lives on her navigation. The first German position was 400 meters ahead. Susan could see muzzle flashes, machine guns firing at the sound of engines. Bullets hit the truck. The windshield cracked. Susan kept driving. She steered straight toward the German position. Koenig, sitting beside her, said nothing. He trusted her completely. The Germans were confused. They could hear vehicles but couldn't see them. Their searchlights swept the desert trying to find targets. Susan drove between the beams, using the darkness as cover. Then they hit the minefield. The first mine detonated 20 meters to their left. A massive explosion. The shockwave rocked the truck. Behind them, another explosion. One of the convoy vehicles had hit a mine. Susan had to make an impossible choice. Slow down and try to pick a safe path, which meant staying exposed to German fire longer, or speed up and hope luck would carry them through the minefield faster than the Germans could target them. She chose speed. Susan floored the accelerator. The truck bounced and lurched over rough ground. More mines detonated, some ahead, some behind, some terrifyingly close. Each explosion lit up the night, briefly revealing the convoy to German gunners. German machine guns opened up. Tracers arced through the darkness. Bullets hit the truck constantly. The armor plating stopped most of them, but some punched through. A round hit the seat next to Koenig, inches from his head. "Keep going," he shouted. Susan kept going. They passed through the first German position. The convoy was still intact, mostly. A few vehicles had been hit, but the rest kept moving. The Germans were scrambling to react, but the French were already past them. Second German position ahead. This one was ready. Searchlights found the convoy. Artillery had time to range. Shells started landing with terrifying accuracy. An explosion directly behind Susan's truck. The vehicle following her was hit, destroyed instantly. The truck behind it swerved, almost crashed, kept moving. Susan drove through smoke and fire. Her visibility was zero. She was navigating by instinct now, by feel, keeping the truck aimed west toward British lines. For 30 minutes, 30 endless minutes, the convoy drove through hell. Mines, machine guns, artillery, German soldiers firing from trenches, Italian positions adding their fire to the chaos. And Susan Travers drove through all of it, never slowing, never stopping, leading 2,500 men towards salvation.
At 1:30 a.m., Susan's truck broke through the final German position. Suddenly, the firing stopped. They were through. Behind them, chaos. Ahead, open desert. Susan didn't slow down, not yet. They needed distance between themselves and the German lines before the enemy could organize pursuit. The convoy reformed behind her. Susan counted headlights in her mirror, trying to figure out how many vehicles were still with them. Dozens, maybe more than 100. A lot had made it through, but a lot hadn't. At 3 a.m., with dawn approaching, Koenig ordered a halt. They'd put 20 kilometers between themselves and Bir Hakeim. Time to assess damage, tend to wounded, figure out who was still alive. Susan stopped the truck. Her hands were cramped from gripping the steering wheel. Her ears were ringing from explosions. She was covered in dust and blood, some hers, mostly from wounded men in the back. She climbed out of the truck and looked back at the convoy. Vehicles were shot up, damaged, some barely running. But they'd made it. Soldiers emerged from trucks and ambulances. They were counting heads, looking for friends, realizing who wasn't with them anymore. Final count, 2,500 men had started the breakout. About 2,000 reached British lines. 500 casualties, killed or captured during the drive. Under any normal calculation, those are terrible numbers. 20% casualties. But everyone knew the alternative. If they'd stayed at Bir Hakeim, it would have been 100% casualties. Surrounded, out of ammunition and water, they would have been forced to surrender or been killed when the position was overrun.
Susan's impossible drive had saved 2,000 lives. General Koenig found her as the sun was rising. Susan was changing a tire on her truck, always the driver, always focused on the vehicle. "La Miss," Koenig said. "That was the most courageous thing I've ever seen." Susan shrugged. "It was just driving, sir." "No," Koenig said, "it was more than that. You led 2,500 men through impossible odds. You didn't hesitate, you didn't falter. You saved us all." Word of the breakout spread through Allied forces. The French had held Bir Hakeim for 16 days against overwhelming odds, then escaped through enemy lines in a midnight drive led by a British woman. British newspapers picked up the story. Susan Travers became famous, the society girl who became a war hero. Photos of her appeared in magazines. She was invited to meet Winston Churchill. Susan hated the attention. She just wanted to get back to work. And the French Foreign Legion had noticed. This British woman had proven herself in combat beyond any doubt. She'd shown courage that matched or exceeded any legionnaire. After the war, in 1945, the French Foreign Legion did something unprecedented. They made Susan Travers an official legionnaire. The first woman ever, the only woman ever, to this day. She was given the rank of adjutant and served until 1947. After the war, she continued driving for French forces in Indochina. She finally retired at age 38, having served in multiple wars on multiple continents.
Susan Travers never sought fame. After her military service, she returned to civilian life quietly. She lived in Paris. She rarely gave interviews. She avoided attention. For decades, her story was almost forgotten. The dramatic battles of World War II, D-Day, Stalingrad, Iwo Jima, overshadowed quieter stories like Bir Hakeim. But the soldiers who were there never forgot. French Foreign Legion veterans would tell stories about La Miss, the British woman who'd saved them all. They'd remember that midnight drive through German lines with awe and gratitude. In 2000, at age 91, Susan finally agreed to tell her story. She worked with a writer to produce a memoir, Tomorrow to Be Brave. It was only then that the full scope of her experiences became public. People were shocked. This elegant, elderly woman had lived through more combat than most soldiers. She'd driven through minefields, survived dive bomber attacks, led convoys through enemy fire, been the only woman in one of the world's most elite military units. Susan died in 2003, age 94. Her funeral was attended by French Foreign Legion officers in full dress uniform. They gave her a military funeral with full honors, something the Legion reserves for its most distinguished members. The French government awarded her the Croix de Guerre, the Médaille Militaire, the Légion d'honneur, but Susan always said her proudest possession was her Legion identity card, the one that proved she was an official legionnaire. Today, there's a memorial to Susan Travers at the French Foreign Legion Museum in Aubagne, France. It's small, just a photograph and a plaque, but it represents something enormous. Proof that courage isn't defined by gender, that heroes come in unexpected forms, and that sometimes the most remarkable warriors are the ones who never expected to become warriors at all. The Bir Hakeim breakout is now taught at military academies as an example of bold tactics under desperate circumstances. But instructors rarely mention that the lead driver was a woman. That detail tends to get lost in the official histories. The soldiers who were there, though, they never forgot. June 10th, 1942. Susan Travers drove through a minefield in complete darkness, under heavy fire, with 2,500 men following her. She had no special training for this, no military background. She just learned to drive because she liked the freedom it gave her. And that night, that skill, plus impossible courage, saved 2,000 lives. Susan's story matters because it challenges assumptions. She was a society woman who became a warrior, a civilian who led soldiers, a woman who earned respect in the most male-dominated military institution in the world. She did all of this without seeking recognition. She drove ambulances and trucks because the work needed to be done. She led that convoy through enemy lines because someone had to, and she was capable. That's heroism in its purest form. Doing what's necessary not because you want glory, but because it's right. The French Foreign Legion's motto is Legio Patria Nostra. The Legion is our homeland. For Susan Travers, a British woman born into privilege, the Legion became her family, and she became a legend. If you want more incredible untold stories from World War II, let me know in the comments what you'd like to hear next. Like and subscribe for more true stories of extraordinary courage from ordinary people.